So I printed this off out of my sketchbook. So it's an A4 sheet. So what I'm going to do is, I think I'm going to cut that out. So I'm going to put this side of this. This is a mixed media paper, so it'll take everything I can throw at it, and I'm going to with a mechanical pencil just go around where I'm placing her. It's not totally perfect, but yes, it shows me exactly. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to add some, I'll actually chop the seeds off too. Right, so to get some tissue, what have I got over here? Well, I've actually got some paper that I've got some colours that I use for something else. I've been using it to mop. What else have I got here? This was used on another project that I had, so that's going to tear some of these up. I like these numbers like this. We'll keep those anyway because they'll be good for something, I'm sure. There's some cool cursive. Something, some text, different texts, some advertisement, more text. What's a bit more colour? Music. There's some blues in that, some tissue, some more blue, maybe that. I think, yeah, there's some nice colours there, and something down there, that. colours. Any words that I want to use? Not moments, okay. Alright, this time I'm going to use the actual Liquitex medium. Brush. I don't know what medium I'm going to use. I'm going to use acrylic. Let's put the tissues on after I've done. Because it's going straight onto the mixed media page, the mixed media page is actually loving the glue and is actually sucking it up, really getting into it. As I was playing back this video, I noticed my voiceover using the microphone on the camera was just too quiet to hear, and it sounded like I was mumbling, which I do, but it just means you couldn't hear what I'm doing. So I just quickly, I cut out the section of me actually putting on most of the collaging. I also decided to put the face down and work around it and work a little bit over the top, you know, making a choice of what I didn't mind to be included on the actual, like the face and the hair, etc. So I made some choices on what to do, and I'm trying to cover up every part of the mixed media in the background. And using this Mod Podge brush really helps because you can actually smooth out a lot of the bubbles, as long as you've got enough of what I'm using, which is matte medium, underneath, you can get a pretty good flat surface other than the actual texture of the papers or card that you've actually placed down in the background. So I'm just going to give this a bit of a clean, I think, here. See, this is the other problem with doing voiceovers, you forget what you were doing. So now that the page is dry, I'm going to put on some gesso. So I'll just grab a brush to do this. And it looks very slow when you're watching the playback on this, but I'm trying to show some of it in live time rather than speed it up like I do, but I'm going to be cutting out some sections of it. So I'm actually using the Dina Wakley brush here, which has a harder bristle section and is very robust, made specifically under Dinah's request, as she, like me, is a messy artist. Difference being I actually can see my desk, so I find now that I'm not as messy as I thought I was. As you can see by the little bit of green that came through, there was still some paint actually in the actual brush bristles, which is fine. That doesn't faze me at all. And I'm using my Mod Podge gesso, which is nearly empty. So now I'm just going to grab some tissue, and I'm actually going to take back some of this gesso. So I'm just putting it on top and wiping it out, and you do get a lovely effect like that. And so you have the choice, you could actually leave it like that or smudge it back out. So that's a choice that you can make. You can use it as another texture, or you can just blend it back a little bit more if that's what you decide to do. So this face that I photocopied and am using, I printed it on an inkjet, so it could possibly bleed, which I don't have a problem with either. Now, if anyone would like a copy of that particular image to try this particular process themselves, if you drop me an email or leave a comment below, I'll contact you and I will give you a link to download that for your own use. This is a one-off opportunity and it will expire at the end of October 2020. So as you see, I'm actually taking back a lot more of the gesso. I just wanted to send the colours back, still retaining some of it. So while it looks like I've wasted some of the gesso, I haven't really. Basically, it's just part of the process of mixed media. You know, sometimes you would leave it totally wiped out, other times, as I've done, you can still see that it's very muted now, so the actual image has been sent back and you can see that the colours aren't as in your face as they once were. I'm just going to dry this off and I'll be back in a sec. Now that that's dry, I'm actually going to just grab my pencil again. This is a soft lead. It's probably, I think it's about a 6B. So it will leave a bit of graphite on the actual page. So what I'm actually doing is just re-going over the lines of the edging of the face, so I have a better idea of where it is when I'm starting to lay down my paints. Now, if you are using this template, it's up to you how you do this. You could also cut out just her face and no hair, and then add your own hairstyle, etc. I'm just following what I know that's there. So it's a hair in a bun, so I'm re-going over those edgings so I have them already in place where I could see it, so I know what I'm doing and where I'm going. So I'm just evening that up on both sides and sweeping that up to the nice bun on top of the head. So with that done, I might actually speed this up a little bit now and see where we go from there. So I've sped that up by 2 now, so we're actually processing at double the speed. So you'll see me being able to do things rather quickly. So I'm just going to trim off the edging of the papers that are hanging over. Depending on what you want to do with it, this is not absolutely necessary, but I find when I'm doing edges, etc., it's a lot easier to do if I don't have bits of the papers hanging over my piece of work. So I do apologise, I've noticed there's a little black dot in the bottom left corner. I have no idea where that came from. I have to have a look at the camera. It may be a bit of splatter has landed on the lens, which is quite possible as it's overhead. So now I'm grabbing the Liquitex Basic, and this is the unbleached titanium white. So it actually is quite a good, from my point of view, I actually find it's actually quite a nice actual skin tone. Has an unusual look. It's very sandy colouring, so I've actually just added a little bit of water to it to make it easier to spread around, and I'm actually going around all the areas where there's actually skin in place, and that includes over the eyelashes and over the nose, and I'm pretty sure I'll probably go also over the eyebrows. You'll still see it because I've added water. it becomes translucent, so you'll still see those lines that are underneath. So this will give an easy start to your skin toning, and it's all it is putting on a foundation layer as such. So if you like, when you're doing your face, and you just put that first foundation layer before you do your other, you know, blemishes, etc., etc., or your shadowing of your own that you do with eyeshadows, etc., etc. So this is basically what I'm doing at the moment. I'm putting under the foundation layer of my makeup, and that's what I'm doing to my girl here. So I'm trying to stay within the lines, and I'm just making sure it's all around and it's all spread evenly. And then I remembered at the last minute I better colour in my ears as well, as ears are the same colour because they're flesh as well. So as you can see, this is a whimsical girl. She's not realistic in her dimensions, etc. The ears aren't similar shape, so I'm just going to dry this. And now that she's dry, you can see the actual papers that are on her face are still showing up. So I'm just going to now grab some Montmartre colours. Now this one's a bright green one. I'm not sure of the colours. I will add a list of them in the bottom, and this is a forest green, if I remember rightly. So I'm going to use these colours in the background and add some mixed media layers and textures, etc. So I've just put the family of grouping colours at the top. I've just added a blue, which can be mixed with the greens, of course, and I've put the burgundy down lower, as that doesn't belong to the same family. So if I added it to the greens, I'd actually get a brown. So I'll just grab no idea what I'm going to grab here. What am I grabbing? I'm grabbing some white from the Montmartre. It's the Dimensions, which is a lot thicker than the others. So I've just added some water, and I'm adding what's called the white of the eyes. Now remember, when you're doing the whites of the eyes are actually like a light blue or grey. The whites aren't actually white, it just appears white, and a lot of people will add them as white in their artwork. When you're doing your shading, don't forget to shade your whites of your eyes as well, so because your eyelids do add shadow depending on where the light is to the whites of your eyes and your pupils. So that said, I've just added the white to the hair to add a bit of background, so it covers some of those pieces of paper. And now I'm going to turn her eyes blue, so this young lady will have blue eyes. I'm using a watercolour brush for this, as it gives me a little bit more fine detail and allows me to stay within the lines better than a flat brush. So this is a round brush that I'm using, and I'm just cleaning it off with certain things. For example, the lipstick that I'm placing here on my girl. Now this is the burgundy, so this adds a very high pop of pink to her face. And at the moment I've left her with the mouth slightly open. So while I've got this colour, I'm actually going to add it to her cheeks, trying to get it in the same spot, and I'm going to add some nice rouge to her face. I just think it brightens up and adds a bit more whimsical to her when you're doing that. So I'm grabbing one of my homemade stencils, which is 2 half circles, and they're all roughly done, so they're all done by hand with using that tool that I've got. And there is a YouTube video on how I do that and the tool I use. So I'm starting with the nice bright lime green. Now this is a colour, this is one of my favourite colours, so I do like to use it if I can. So I'm just going to add that into 3 areas on my page. So that, and I'm making sure I'm not going over the face with this. So I'm just wrung out some of the water from the actual baby wipe. I'm sorry, I haven't quite got that in frame, and I do apologise, you won't see all of it, but what I'm doing is I'm taking away the paint. You need to do this while it's still wet, so if you're in a warm room, you'll need to actually either slightly wetten your actual paint or add it a little bit thicker so you can actually do the negative stencil on it. So I'm really wiping away, and because I put the gesso underneath, this is why it's working so well. This doesn't always work so well for me, because if the room is warm and I'm doing this, it doesn't work as well. So if you're in a hot environment, just have that in mind, that when you're trying to do this, a warm room will not be your friend when you're coming to do that particular trick with your stencils. So I'm just going to give that a dry so I can go a little bit further, because the fact that it wasn't already dry shows that my room wasn't warm, so I will need to dry it off because it wasn't on that thick. So now I'm coming in with the darker green, and it's always good to have a darker colour to anchor, I find, to anchor it in. You can use either dark blues or blacks and that, but I find it just helps with the mixed media layout to have a darker colour anchored somewhere for you. So I'm just going to again add that into 3 places, and this time, I'm not sure if I mentioned, this time I'm actually using the Diane Wakely flat brush. I think this is the number 1 if I'm remembering right, or it could be one of the little bit smaller one. So I'll add this into 3 places. Careful of the girl and what she's done, and as you can see, I've gone over some of the bright green in that usage. So I'm just grabbing the same stencil and I'm going to take that back, and because I dried the previous acrylic where I'd gone over the lime green, that's bringing that back out. But when I remove the stencil, it will have the dark green over a small area. One thing also to remember when you're doing this, no matter how much of the moisture you've squeezed out of your nappy wipe, you will still get around the edging a damper area. And another trick you could do if you wanted to is your baby wipe is now really loaded of colour. So you could also use, if you've got it on this piece, it wouldn't be as possible, but you could use that to actually place a lighter colour, a muted colour of that green in another area if you wanted to. Like what I've just done accidentally to the bun. And I'm using it to also clean up the mess underneath. Not sure why on this day I was concerned about mess, I suppose, because it was actually a loose A4. I was more concerned about it than what I normally would be. So I just give that brush a clean off. Now what I'm using to clean off my brushes, and it actually cleans well, it's a trick that I got from Karen Campbell. She actually uses a glass jug, and she's actually got like marbles or beads, glass beads in the bottom of her jar. I got those little round flat glass beads that you can get from Bunnings, and I'm now doing the same, and it's really good because it actually helps loosen the paint off your brush. It doesn't 100% clean it, because the dirtier the water gets, of course, you're still retaining some of the actual paint anyway, but it gives a good starting point to get going. So I'm now done the yellow over the green, and I've grabbed another stencil to go over and again that word has disappeared from my head at the moment. Puncella. Using the puncella now to actually do a smaller takeaway with it, so there's a lot more of the yellow left, but you can still see through to the other colour. And now I only used the yellow once there, and now I'm going to go over with the white blue, and I think I will use the puncella again. Yes, so I use that again. Now my little nappy wipe has got a bit of yellow through it, but that's alright, and occasionally I rub it off on the hair. Not sure why I'm doing that, but it just seems to be what ends up happening. So I'm just drying that off, because with the puncella because it's small, you're pushing down to get the colours out. It really gets wet underneath. And another thing you can do is when you've done that, because the paint that you've sat your stencil over, you can then stamp some of that off elsewhere in the positive. So you've actually can use it in a couple of different ways, and it's a really cool technique to get the hang of. So I'm adding the other blue down in the bottom left there, and adding a little bit of white just to blend it through, and then some of the burgundy, which is in her lips, up in the top. Now it looks like I've covered everything up, but of course I will be using stencils to actually return some of that underneath colour. And I've got a nice little purple mix there, mixing it with the blue there. So wiping off all the blue here, as you can see, I'm going all over with this punch out. Now another thing you can do, and I'm just stamping that off, and there'll be a little bit of blue on the other side now. Now another thing, be careful, if it's too tacky all the way down, you can pull off a lot more layers. It can stick, especially with acrylic paint, because acrylic paint is plastic. And as you just seen, I actually stamped a little bit on her neck there, just to add another dimension. And I'm deciding as I go what I want to include, whether I want to include the exterior mixed media onto my face here. So doing that, and I'm just stamping some of that colour off elsewhere and coming back in and doing that. So there's a lot of that punchella now in that background. So I'll just dry this off and I will be back. Right, so now I'm coming in with another stencil I made. This one was partly cut from my silhouette, and then I just finished it off as I think I recorded the fact that my silhouette isn't actually cutting out this particular stencil sheet, so I've been having to use the hand tool to actually finish things off, which is great with these particular arrowy heads here. So I'm adding some white and using a makeup brush, and I'm dabbing it through and adding another layer of stencils onto my page. And as you can see, I've actually got quite a bit of the stamped punchella on her face now, just to add a little bit of texture in that area. And this white, you need to bring a bit of white back into your mixed media pieces. It just helps, I think, to balance it out and to give it a bit more life to it. So just drying that off quickly, because it shouldn't take too long, because it's just been almost stamped on, so it's not that thick. So now I'm adding some of that white in with the green, and now made a paler green there. So I'm going to grab another stencil, which is one that was created using one of my die cuts, and this was left over, and I love the shape. I will probably make it out on my stencil sheet at some point, and I like overlapping and making sure I've got them equalised, etc., so that they join back up when I'm using this one. And because it's paper, sometimes it does stick, which is a bit annoying, but I still really love this particular bit of stencil, and it adds a nice little, they're almost like little leaves, and you can, as you've seen, I can turn it the other way to get a different angle, but it's exactly the same effect, so you can actually do that, and turning the stencil isn't changing the actual pattern motion. So as you can see, I don't actually put this particular one in all areas as I did with the arrowhead. I just do it in chosen areas just to bring a different thing. You can still see the punchella through those particular stencils, and you can still see the arrows, and you can still see the half circles, etc. and it's just like adding more depth in behind so that you can see things. And I'm just adding a faint bit through the hair and across the forehead, just for a point of difference with this mixed media piece. So now that that's dry, fully dry, I'm bringing in charcoal pencil and going around the edging and actually blending that in to give a bit more depth, and actually I'll actually bring her out a little bit now and show her off a bit more onto the page. Now, as I said before, because I've used a thinned out colour for her background, it means that I can now still see the lineage that I already done in the early stages. I'm just redoing her ear a little bit, giving her a bit more shape in her ear, but again smudging, including in her eye there, and I'm just smudging that upper eye rather than the whole eye, highlighting her nose and the bottom peak just above her lips. So this is a really good effect to add the depth, and of course, and I'm going to grab another pencil which I think will be a bit more softer, and again just continue trying to add some shading into and bringing her face forward, so I can work on her face now and bring in some character into her now that I've done the background. So now I've got my paint pens out, and I'm just adding a bit more, and I'm going to get these Tooly Art paint pens that I've got here, and I'm going to use some of them to do some more mark making in the background and adding some more action to it. So I've just got the little white Tooly Art, and I'm just bringing some of those arrows out in the foreground by just going over them and just popping them out a little bit more. So what it'll do is it'll push back what I've gone over, but bring those arrows out a little bit. So it's a kind of a trick of the eye. And I'm not doing it to every single one of the arrows, I'm only doing it in parts. So I'm just having a look at what colours I've got here. And priming the actual paint pens up again, as they've been sitting for a while. So remember to shake, burp, shake, and then squeeze it out a little bit. So again, I'm doing some more mark making in the background. So once I finish, I might just skip the mark making so you'll see that later on, and I'll be back in a minute. Okay, so back again, and I'm getting into putting in some of the burgundy in mark making using the larger Tooly Art paint pens and using just little lines in areas. So I'm just checking that her eye's dry, and I'm going to just add that little spark in her eye and there, and I lighten up her at the end of her nose, because the light will reflect back off the nose and on the lower lip, as the lower lip is further in front than the other. So I'm just checking her shadowing out, etc., and seeing what I need to do. Put those pens back and clean up a little bit. Okay, so I'm now going to just bring in some more of the darkness and bring some of those forward as some of the mark making went into the actual hair, etc. So I'm just grabbed my Mitsubishi permanent archival pen, and I'm just going over and doing some fine lining on the face, and I'm making the top lid darker so it pops out a bit better, and making sure that the circle of her pupil is actually rounded. just because when you're using paint pens sometimes you don't get a true edge, and deciding whether I'm going to actually put the bottom lid in, and it's that at the moment, as you see, it's not there, and it actually, even though it's quite light, it just adds that little bit more. So I'm just adding a little bit more feature to her nose and her mouth, retaining her mouth a little bit open there, and just having a look. And sometimes it's easier to see it if you raise it up, and I'm actually getting something to actually have that, so I can actually have it on a small, like a 15 to 20 degree angle on the actual table, so I can actually see the work at a true face on, because as it's sitting on the desk you don't get that true face on, you're actually looking at her on an angle anyway. So I've just grabbed the big Posca pen and I've just added the dark line right around just to give it a bit of framing, and what this is doing is helping me give me time to work out what I want to do next with her. And again, adding some more mark making, because while you're thinking, mark make, you know, you probably can go a little bit overboard with mark making, and yes, I probably do with my layers, remembering that every time you change the direction it is another layer on the page. So, you know, the gesso on the back, and then you've done all the decoupage, and then you do the gesso, and then you do the paint on the face and all of that. So there's a lot of layers in this particular piece, as there usually is in a lot of my pieces of work. So I've just added some black in the background, and as you see, that actually made it pop a little bit. So what I'm doing now is I'm grabbing some Payne's grey and some white, I'm assuming, or am I just grabbing a brush? Yeah, just grabbed a brush. So this is Payne's grey, which is a dark grey, but it has like a blue tinge to it, and I really love it. It's actually quite a lovely, well, actually this particular one, it's almost a purpley grey. It definitely does look like there's some blue in there. So I've thinned it out so it's more transparent, and I'm just putting that as her hair colour all around. And hasn't that made a difference just doing that? And I'll also adding it as her eyebrows, which makes sense. If you've got that colour hair, you usually have that colour eyebrow. Usually. Doesn't happen with everybody, but usually. So I've just done that, and I've made sure that the paint texture goes around at the top. Now I've added a little bit of a fringe by just dragging the brush down to give it like a loose little fringe at the top there. And I think it really makes her face look a lot better just doing that particular trick there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm grabbing some paper towel and I'm pulling some of that paint off. Isn't that just amazing? It's now light grey and it still looks absolutely awesome, but it's been pulled back so it's not as in your face. So just drying that off, and because it's rather thin it shouldn't take too long to dry. But I don't know about you, but I find that skin colour is actually quite nice. It's actually working really well with that hair colour. It's almost the same, it's just a little bit greyer than what I am. Needs some white in it, doesn't it? So now I'm grabbing my original stencil and I've added some of the metallic grey of my Dina Wakley paints, and I'm now just going to dab that through and bringing some of those half circles back into the background. So they've kind of been pushed back a bit, so I'm just going to add some more of those into the page because I've introduced a new colour. So basically what I do like to do is, if I've introduced a new colour, I do like to make sure it's in the background somewhere. Sometimes it'll just be a little bit, sometimes it'll be a little bit more obvious like this. And as you can see, because it's still so wetted down, it's a lighter shade than what a black would be. And I've just not put that on her hair, I've made it so it looks like it's gone in behind. I'm just making sure they are all dryish and not so lumpy, and I think that made a bit of a difference there. So here is a freeze frame as I'm looking at it a little bit closer, and I'm just, as you see, checking it out, giving it a bit of a bend so I can make sure it's flat, and still trying to work out what to do next, what I need to possibly add to it. So I decided to do, guess what, some more mark making in the background. So I've grabbed one of the stamp sets I got, which is a Tracy Scott, and added some text in behind. So now I'm just again grabbing one of my charcoal pencils and just adding some highlight to the eyebrows and actually defining them a little bit. Added a little bit of facial line in between. Now I'm adding the top lash and just adding some shadow into it. I decided it needs shadow anyway, because you can't have it just, faces need shadow to breed them out. So what I'm doing is I'm actually using the charcoal pencil to do the shading. Rather than adding paint, I'm actually using the grey that's already been introduced with the pencil before, the hair, etc. And I'm actually using that as the actual shadow tool into this piece. And it's coming to from my view, it's coming up rather nicely, and I really do like the finished product of this. And I'm actually highlighting her nose, bringing in the shadows. So basically the shadows, just trying to remember which way, the shadows coming in slightly from the bottom, that would be to cause this particular balance of shading that I'm using here. And so all it is a case of drawing and rubbing with my finger and making sure, like under the hair will leave a shadow on your face. You've got to remember, anything that's going to is in front will be lighter, and anything that's down behind will get a darker shade, including under the neck. That's something you need to remember, is under the neck is always darker, and so just adding those bits of shading makes a big difference. As you see, it's given her a little bit more of features. And now I'm actually using a blending stump and actually blending that in, so it's hasn't got so much lines. And that can be done with a slight circular motion as you're going around and doing that. So, and remember, this has been sped up twice over, so this is a case of, this is a little bit faster than what it would be being done if you were doing it yourself. So that made a massive difference, I think. So I'm thinking basically all she probably needs now is some eyelashes because I think she looks rather bare without eyelashes. So I'm just adding the white again, as when you're doing things that have dirty, like particularly like graphite, etc., your white ends up disappearing a little bit from the actual background. So here is where I'm adding some of that grey that I was talking about. So I'm actually going over about a third of the eye and just going across the top, and so that will show, that's given the eye a little bit of shading there. So I'm grabbing the darker Tooly Art paint pen and just adding a little bit more colour and tone to her eye. And of course a little bit of pink in the corner of your eye, which is your eye duct that you have there, and that has a little bit of pink as well. So her cheeks needed bringing forward again, so I grabbed the pink paint pen and went over the cheeks and blended that in with my finger. It's an acrylic paint. You can add it, and while it's wet, blend it. It's what it can do. That's what you do with ordinary acrylic paint. You can do the same with the acrylic paint pens as well. So here you can notice that the top lip is darker than the bottom lip. The bottom lip always seems to get that. Now I'm just putting some white on the bottom eyelid just to give it a bit of highlight there, and making sure again the whites of the eye that is visible is showing. So now I'm going to grab my Jane Devonport eyelash pen. I'm not sure what it's actually called, but it's used for eyelashes mostly. Now remembering, when you do eyelashes, that they're like a bracket, and so the right side, it's the outer bracket, and the left side is the front bracket, so front and back bracket. And so therefore you flick on that bracket, and as you come into the middle it straightens out more. And you can do this as long as you like, as thick as you like. It's your lady, you do her as you wish. You know, have fun. If you're going to attempt something like this, have fun with it. You know, I'm happy, and I really would love you to show me your finished product. You could tag it with catagunya or Swan and come up with it. And because a black dot ended up on her face, she's ended up with a beauty mark. So her imperfections are still being shown a little bit there in her art piece. So now I've got the white gel pen, and that actually comes in handy. So if you've done the eyelashes and you feel that they're clumping too much, using the white gel pen will actually separate them again. So it's a great little tool like that. So I'm just adding the white on the nose and adding some white shadowing on the cheeks there, and adding some white in some of the areas. And now I'm putting some wings on her, because this is something I learnt from the lovely Tamara from willowing.org, and I love adding little touches with my mark making that are a little bit more freer and unusual in the mark making. So here I'm adding the butterfly and adding some dimension, and again I apologise for the fact that this isn't fully in screen. And so there's her wings on her neck there, and I'm now going to add some writing, some asemic writing across her eye, because I can, and that's basically what mixed media is. You can. So I'm adding some doodling through here, and I've just brought it up because I've realised it's out of camera, and I'm going to add some flowers on this side, and it's just fun. It's just adding this, that little bit of quirkiness on the page, which ends up making it yours. Yes, I got the inspiration from Tamara, but what I'm doing here is me. I can't copy Tamara 100%. I don't choose to, but I love some of her ideas, and I love the freedom, and I love the fantasy world that she portrays in her work, and I like to also incorporate it in mine, so I add it my way. I can't always remember what shapes to do, but like I've added these little I suppose they're like those light catching little crystals that you have in your windows sometimes. So I'm adding some of those, dropping down. Usually I have hearts or circles on those, and then I'll add some unusual shapes or something as well, so they just sit there. They're not too obvious, but they're there. And I'm just going over some of that asemic writing there. And asemic writing is just exaggerated writing, so it's a case of what I've written there won't be legible for others, but I know what I did write. Can I read it again now? No, I can't, but it's fine. It's what journaling and mixed media to me is about. So I just add some final little touches to it. And I hope you will have a go yourself. And as I said, I'd love to see what you've done. Post it on Instagram and tag me, or put it on Facebook and tag me in it. I'd love to see what you've done. If you'd like to try one of these skills that I can send you, if you send me a message. So now that I've done a bit of doodling, I realised that some of the colour wasn't bright enough for my thoughts. So I'm actually going to grab my pastels and add some more colour to it. So I'm using the black to add a little bit more depth around her head. And as you can see, my fingers are getting very messy. Now, being the fact that this is a pastel, remember that it will continue activating or will be smudged. So you do need to seal this, whether you use hairspray and then use a sealant over the top, or just a fixative. That's highly up to you. But just remember, if you're leaving anything with this particular medium and not actually sealing it, it will smudge, which would be very sad if you ended up with a smudge piece. I know I get very frustrated with some that I've left in books and I'd forgotten to seal. So I'm just adding even some mark making with this particular medium. It adds still some colour, and it's short. And like, I'm adding more pink to the cheeks just to add a little bit more depth. And doesn't some of these particular pastels really do make things pop, I find. And it really impresses me on how they actually, what they actually do with themselves. So I keep looking at it and seeing what else I need to do. So now that I've added some of those the colours that were already in there, and I'm just bringing them back in the background by just scribbling and then rubbing them in and blending them into the background, or trying to blend them into the background. At the moment, some of them don't look quite blended, but I'm sure I will actually end up doing so. Look, it comes down to the fact that it's really hard sometimes to stop, but if you want something to pop, you sometimes just have to spend a little bit extra time on it. And I'm even using some of the the skin tones on the face, including the bridge of the nose, to make her pop a little bit. And here on the cheek, I'm trying to push back those cheek parts underneath her nice rosiness, and including on her eyelid, and that just pushing it back. And the same when I go down here, I'm just adding a little bit more detail and depth to the piece. I personally don't think it can go massively too far. The thing is, you're going to be your worst critic anyway, so have fun with it. And if that means taking it too far, you take that as a lesson, and maybe not next time. So I'm going to do some more ischemic writing down through the side here using my black pen, because this piece actually made me feel quite a bit, and I'm actually very proud of what I've achieved with her. And writing that down in ischemic writing means that it's recorded there. I've added me to the page. Now here I decided to change her little beauty mark to a heart because it looks better. So that's that done. So I'm just going to now add some black around the edging, and that will, rather than the harsh, which was the Posca pen, this will actually blend into the page more. So here I found some wording to place on it, so I'm just cutting them out as that was printed on a page, and it's got the outline on it already. So that little quote out is, today is a good day for dreaming. So I'm going to add that to the page. So I just add the border again with my food ball pen, and just added the black over it. And now I'm going to use some liquid glass glossy accents to stick it to the page when I got it opened, as it had sealed, which is standard because I hadn't used it for a while, and I'd used up all the other glue that I had for doing these type of stickies. So I'm just making sure that's spread by using one of the Mod Podge brushes out, and making sure that goes into the water so I don't lose it. That's where it'll go in a minute. So sticking that on the bottom left hand corner and making sure that it's straight, and again, sorry, off camera. And basically that's it for my girl. So today is a good day for dreaming. Bye.